Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we convene our fourth of five sessions on a reconsideration, a reexamination of the pandemic and the vaccines that were used in a mandated way throughout the pandemic, not only in the United States, but in many countries around the world. We have been taking a risk because we didn't know what directives have been given to the algorithms. We are very pleased that after 4 days, we have not been compromised in any way with a discussion that only a year or 2 years ago would have been cause for immediate removal from YouTube and various other social media platforms. So I'm very grateful that the climate has changed with the Trump administration and with Robert Kennedy Jr. being appointed to the Health and Human Services Secretaryship, and that we all have an opportunity to reflect on what happened and why, and how we can better protect the health of our children, the health of all citizens as we move forward in a more informed way. I want to take a few minutes to summarize many of the different aspects that have come to light with Jessica Rose on Monday and then Mary Holland on Tuesday, Jeffrey Jackson yesterday, as we begin our considerations today. By drawing on the work of Matthias Desmet, a professor of psychology and education at the University of Belgium, who wrote a book several years ago, which became an instant classic and bestseller called The Psychology of Totalitarianism. And I want to just very briefly summarize this because he brings into one, actually a very small little volume, which is I read as soon as it came out, what has basically taken place. And he uses as his model the extraordinary work, the classic work on totalitarianism by Hannah Arendt at the end of the Second World War. She reflected on the national socialism that was embraced by the German nation. And she and Professor Desmet point out the following characteristics of totalitarianism, which Desmet tracks in his book around what happened with COVID. It was a classic case of a conjuring up of a totalitarian situation in which the world found itself. And it has the following basic ingredients. Number one, the lockdown. The first principle of totalitarianism is isolation. The second principle is the cultivation of fear through controlled media that justifies the isolation because you need to be afraid of an enemy, in this case, the COVID-19 virus. And that gives rise to projection. And this is a classic psychological symptom among people who are uprooted through isolation, through manipulation of the media to be afraid. What begins to take place in the public mind is enemy projection. And that enemy projection is around anyone who's challenging what the government is saying. So after the isolation, after the fear, the enemy became anybody who was saying that this wasn't true. So you need to shut them all down. And that projection gives rise to what Carl Jung and Hannah Arendt referred to as mass hysteria. The isolation cuts you off. The fear enables you to blame somebody. Mass hysteria is that extraordinary phenomenon first observed by Carl Jung, the great psychiatrist in Switzerland in the 20th century, who lived through the Nazi phenomenon in the Second World War and wrote about it immediately after the war. That mass hysteria is that situation where people remain individuals and, by all accounts, rational, conventional, law-abiding individuals. But collectively, they engage in something that can only be described as insane. That's mass hysteria. And I thought it would be useful for us to contemplate Desmond's psychology of totalitarianism as it pertained to the pandemic and the vaccines, because he connects all the dots. And once you read his work and you contemplate on what you yourself observed happened, you'll see, as we have been contemplating, that this was much more profound an exercise than just simply trying to deal with public health. This was an exercise in totalitarian control. And when we understand that, everything else follows. And this totalitarian mechanisms can be applied to the German people in the 1930s, to the global public between 2020 and 2023 on a completely separate issue. It's a basic category of control that can be applied to different groups and in different situations, depending on how the governing elites choose to do so. We're all susceptible to it. And that's why it's so effective. So thank you, everyone. I want to welcome all of you to Humanity Rising, and with a deep appreciation that we've all come together for this extraordinary conversation this week about an issue that affected us all. I would like to now bring on Wayne Rohde, who I want to say right at the onset, he was the one person who really helped me put all the panelists together. Jessica Rose, Mary Holland, John Clark, who will be talking tomorrow. And he comes out into this domain, as so many people have, like Mary Holland, out of his own deep personal family experience with the vaccines that predated COVID, but are intensified by the pandemic experience. So Wayne, I want to thank you. He wrote a classic book now, which is sort of a bestseller in this domain, called The Vaccine Court. So Wayne, why don't we start? Just tell us your story of how you, going along, minding your own business, woke up to the vaccine issue, and what you began to do as you engaged with this issue, and then we'll talk about the issues raised in your book and various other related issues. But thank you for coming on.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Jim, for allowing for me to be here, but also appreciate you and everyone else here to have this forum for people to readily exchange information and ideas. I guess I'll start back at the beginning. I have my wife Robin and I. We have twin boys. They're now 27 years of age, Nicholas and Austin. And at the age of 13 months, we took our two boys in for, I guess they call them well baby checkups or something like that. And they were administered the MMR vaccine at the time. Austin got the vaccine and he cried and screamed for a few minutes, and then um, he was okay with it. But Nicholas had a severe reaction to it right away. The classic arching of the back, screaming, constant crying, and that went on for several hours. As we left the doctor's office, we took him home, and then where he started spiking temperatures, and then over the course of the next 24 to 48 hours, a lot of the other issues kicked in, such as vomiting, diarrhea, not sleeping, not eating, nothing. He was constantly very fussy and crying all the time. And a pediatrician, my wife would call back maybe 3, 4 times a day for over the course of the next 2 weeks and said, well, that is sometimes an example of a reaction, but he should be fine as long as you maintain his temperature. Control his temperature. What we didn't know is that he actually suffered what was later diagnosed as an encephalopathy. He didn't go into near comatose type scenario that several kids do, which would have been an acute encephalopathy, but he did suffer a brain injury. He had a severe reaction to the vaccine, but we didn't know that this was a vaccine injury until much later in life. We were thinking, okay, we'll manage it, and then within a couple of weeks, he settled down. But it was over the course of the next 18 months that we noticed major developmental shifts in Nicholas. He started to lose his speech. He was able to talk prior, and then he eventually lost his ability to speak. He lost his desire to play with his brother, the social skills. And then one day, the classic, we come in and watch him staring at a ceiling fan. And watching him, that was what he was doing. It's just that. And within about 2 years, it started looking like he was almost like white as a ghost. There was no distance, nothing in his eyes to say that he was engaging with us. It wasn't until the age of probably 4.5 years at the time, and now you're looking back 20 plus years. There was such a delay in getting any type of a diagnosis. We went to a Columbia trained psychiatrist, and she looked at and for 2 days worked with our family, and then later came back and said, your son has autism, a severe diagnosis of autism. Then she told us, there's really not much I can do for you. She gave us 2 pages, Xerox 2 pages out of a college textbook, and gave us a prescription for Ritalin. We left her office, went out to the parking lot, and my wife tore up the Ritalin prescription right away. Says, this is not good. And this is not right. We came home and she started digging into what was going on with this. Myself, I started focusing more on trying to figure out how to pay for the medical bills for all the treatments and therapies that we were giving Nicholas that insurance companies were denying. So I led an effort in down in Oklahoma where we were living at the time to try to get insurance coverage. And this is back in 2006 and 2007. And it became a real contentious battle across the United States. Unfortunately, I believe as of currently, almost every state now requires some form of insurance coverage for autism. But back then, insurance companies were denying treatments, medically proven, clinically sound treatments for autism and other disabilities. So that's where I was focusing on. But it came to a point, and it was in about 2010, early 2010, we were going bankrupt. We were paying out $3,000 a month in cash for therapies for our son, Nicholas. We just couldn't survive anymore. So we moved up to Minnesota, which did have an insurance coverage mandate. And we were able to take advantage of that. And from there, but I've always known something was with the vaccine issue. And what was interesting is that a few years earlier, my wife sent 3 bankers boxes, those bankers boxes that people put their stuff in of medical records, and sent it to an attorney, Cliff Shoemaker, out of up there in Virginia, who was very experienced dealing with vaccine injuries. He later became Hannah Polling's attorney of record. But he looked over everything, took a couple months to look over everything, and said, you guys have a great case for vaccine-induced encephalopathy, causing a regression into autism. By the way, there's thousands of similar cases around the United States.
Yeah.
Very, very similar. And yet our government says that doesn't exist. And I'll get to that a little bit later. But he said, you only got one problem. You're time barred, meaning you cannot file a claim in what we call the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, which is the vaccine court, because we were 9 months, 10 months too late. The statute of limitations for injury is 3 years, only 3 years from the first symptoms. And when my wife first recognized this and sent off a request to the Shoemaker law firm, it was just too late. So there was nothing we could do there. But that just stuck with me a little bit. And I just couldn't understand, what is this NVICP and why is there only a statute of limitations of only 3 years when you notice around product injury around the United States, a lot of states have statute of limitations, maybe up even 8 years, 9 years, even up to the age of 18 for certain products causing injury or death to children, but not vaccines. It's 3 years for injury, and it's only 2 years for death. I started inquiring about it right as we were leaving Oklahoma, and I became good friends with Lou Conti. We were exchanging information all the time, talking about, he had children and who were affected too. Robert Krakow, who's an attorney in New York City, who his son went similar path. Mary Holland, who you met and your audience met on Tuesday. So I started talking with them, and I started asking them, how many other parents know about what's going on or are walking the same path? And when we moved up to Minnesota in 2010, Mary Holland reached out, Lou Conti reached out and said, Wayne, why don't you start talking to people about their experiences and their journeys? And that's what I did. I started interviewing families. Um, and it wasn't until about 2012 that Lou reached out and said, hey, Skyhorse Publishing up in New York City wants to talk to you about publishing a book about families and this program. And by the way, the only thing that's ever been really written up about this program is white papers written by law students. So all they're doing is they're writing the classroom, the theory of what this program is, not what is actually happening. So that's what I started doing. I ended up interviewing over 285 families. I
Wow.
stayed away from the autism side of it a little bit. I wanted to know other issues. Why hepatitis B was causing what they call premature pediatric death, or SIDS. It was a leading cause of SIDS. I started getting into a little bit of the Gardasil issue, DTaP, the early onset of seizures and epilepsy, things like this, and I just discovered there's a whole world here of people that are having problems, but no one knows about them. And then the process of this vaccine court. So that's what brought me kind of towards why I wanted to write my first book, which was The Vaccine Court. And that was published in 2014.
Well, tell us about the book. Tell us what your if there's any anecdotes that are particularly important for us to consider, and then what your summaries were, because it
Okay.
was a major had a major impact.
Right. The first book, which was published in 2014, I've never written any type of book before, nor even in college. I was economics, finance. Literature was the furthest thing from me. I had no idea. And it was quite of an eye-opening experience dealing with an editor, and she was just wonderful, but it was demanding. But what I wanted to do was actually put a personal touch to a federal program that most people did not understand. Matter of fact, most people did not even know what was going on. Um, People didn't understand that you cannot sue the vaccine manufacturers directly. Um, Prior to 2011, you had to basically go in and file a petition showing that you had an injury or death claim from one of the established vaccines. Now, at the beginning, and when the program first started back in the mid 1980s, and everybody knows that President Reagan signed the law in 1986. What a lot of people don't know is he was very reluctant to sign this, but it was part of a huge budget reconciliation bill, and it was snuck in as part of that bill. And this is the way Congress works: is that there's never a standalone clean bill passed. It's always controversial stuff. It's like a Christmas tree. Everybody's hanging their ornaments on it. But Secretary Baker and Vice President Bush drug them to do that. They drug them through the hallways, if you will, if there's a way of creating a visual um, picture of this, and said, you need to sign this entire bill. But Reagan did not want to sign this because he didn't believe the executive branch should be adjudicating cases. And what he meant by this is that the Secretary of HHS is in charge of this entire program. Yes, they use the federal courts for appeals, but the original process, it's a hybrid type program, is the executive branch, the Secretary of HHS. He believed that the court system should have been handling this all, and people should have just been able to go to court. But so there was a compromise in the bill. and that is that you can file. There were 7 vaccines that were the vaccines that you were allowed to file injury claims against. You had measles, you had mumps, you had rubella, you had diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, and then you had the oral polio. That was the 7. And then as the vaccine manufacturers started changing, then you got Merck bringing in, MMR as its own standalone O3 combo. And then we moved from oral to an injected form of polio. We have that, but that's how those things were moved. And there was hundreds and hundreds of petitions filed at the beginning. Well, a lot of people didn't understand is that the threat that was brought forth to Congress from vaccine manufacturers is that, hey, we're getting sued left and right because the DTP or DPT vaccine, which is a very dirty vaccine, it's really not we discontinued it years ago, was killing hundreds of kids and severely injuring thousands of kids. And people were bringing court cases and winning court cases. And these manufacturers are saying, we're going out of business because we can't, keep producing this and then losing all these lawsuits. Well, common sense says, well, then make a better vaccine. But no, this is not what they did. They convinced Congress, hey, we're getting out of the vaccine business. And Congress fell for that and said, okay, we're going to protect you. So they gave them what we call the immunity clause. And then they later added where doctors were then immune to prosecution. Originally, they weren't. So you have the manufacturers were not allowed to be sued. Well, the compromise, though, is that after 240 days, you can actually be in the program and decide I'm going to exit the program and take my chances in state court. Well, here's where I started digging into. I wanted to find out how many people actually did leave the program and sue. Because, here, for the last couple of years, you hear, well, we need to get rid of the NVICP. We need to have vaccine manufacturers need to be liable again. I take a different position on that. I said, you should not do that. Yes, I'd like to see them liable again. But prior to the U.S. Supreme Court ruling in Brunswick in 2011, you could sue the vaccine manufacturer. I had trouble finding more than 3 cases that were actually successful. It's like big tobacco. It was very difficult for an individual to sue tobacco companies. No one was successful against tobacco until the states came together and then they had to compromise. It's the same thing here. Pharma manufacturers are they control Congress. They're the largest lobbying firm. For every member of Congress, there's 7 lobbyists. It's crazy. So when people say we need to get rid of the NVICP, I say, hold on. And I'll explain to you a little bit later on why we shouldn't. But to sue a manufacturer is very difficult, very expensive, and probably very lengthy in process. This program was set up to be fast, efficient, and generous to those who have been injured. And sure enough, that's what was happening. We were compensating for SIDS in the beginning. We were compensating for severe injury from DPT. But along comes the federal government a few years later. As a matter of fact, in the mid-90s, under Bill Clinton's administration, the Secretary of HHS, Donna Shalala, removed seizure disorder from the vaccine injury.
Mhm.
And so that caused a dramatic shift in all the many petitions where it used to be conceded, hey, there is an injury here. The government will concede and then we'll pay out benefits, maybe pain and suffering and future medical care, things like this. Um, but with that, she took that out. So now all these petitions went from conceded table cases to where you had to prove them. And from there, it became very litigious, very adversarial. And hold on here for a second. Um, I have a couple pets here that wanted to make an appearance.
No worries.
But anyway, so it created this huge shift from where we were compensating children on a regular basis and taking care of their medical needs to where now they had to be forced to find medical experts, and then the litigation and the became very expensive. And a lot of kids, parents just gave up because it took 8, 9, 10, 11 years to get through a case, and then they find it dismissed. The federal government kind of adopted a policy to protect the vaccination program, not to protect the individual. Okay. You saw that in the 90s, and it became even worse because we started adding more and more vaccines to the program, to the childhood schedule, and without proper testing, but also the requirements or for getting compensation or changed. The definitions of encephalopathy were constantly being restricted to where it's almost no child can be diagnosed with encephalopathy today, hardly any that meet the requirements for being compensated. So the program through our federal government is really changed where it's no longer for children, and I can prove that through the statistics of the decisions. But what I did is I showed people how we would file, and the court system was never, this program was never set up to litigate what they call off table, meaning the injuries that were not clearly defined in the beginning, and they are now requiring off table, and it became nearly impossible to get compensation in the 90s and in the 2000s and even today. Um, but I gave some examples in the original book. I did some interviews that I published. I didn't want to publish all the interviews because a lot of these are families it's a very gut wrenching. And I got to a point, excuse me, that anyway, I got to a point where I was interviewing families on hepatitis B causing premature pediatric death. And it got to be a real dark period in my life because I was listening to these families talking about the death of their child, 2 days later, 3 days later. And I had to take a break for a little bit when I was first doing the first book because it just got to you because you were listening to these families just pour their hearts out. They've been through that nightmare once. Then they go through it the second time when they're trying to seek compensation. And now they have someone who wants to talk to them about their experiences on a third time. And it's just something that just readily it's difficult, but these families are suffering. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to write about some of them. But most people just don't understand the journeys and experiences that these parents go through. So The Vaccine Court is the book, the original book. Hopefully, people can read it and understand that this whole process is not what it was originally set out to be. When I published my second book, which is basically Vaccine Court 2.0, what I did is I updated some of the data in there, added some new chapters, took out a few of the interviews that I did with some families, had to make room with it. And I talked about the unanswered questions paper that was in the program. Hold on here. Sorry about that. The unanswered questions paper, which is something that a lot of people don't understand. That this is Mary Holland, Robert Krakow, Lou Conte. They uncovered originally, found 83 cases of vaccine-induced autism. And they went about trying to figure out what's going on. Why is this program saying there is no connection between vaccines and autism? We don't compensate. And yet the program is doing it quietly. And what we found out is that they found these cases and published this paper back in May of 2011. 2011. I wrote the backstory to this. What I did is I took those 4 authors and I sat down with them and talked to them about their issues, about how they put together the program, the threats that they received, but also how they came across and how Robert F. Kennedy Jr. met with them for the first time. And that was back in 2009 at Pace University. What was interesting is there's also what I call the little Watergate moment when Lou Conte, who was one of the co-authors, he's a probationary officer up there in Westchester County in New York, and he received a phone call one summer day, and it was raining, and he was in his living room going through some papers. And it was somebody from Washington, D.C. is all he knew. The area code came up, but it was a private number, but it had an area code of Washington, D.C. And he was told, look more, there's more cases. And it was kind of like, one of those deep throat type messages, there's more cases. And that's exactly what it was. So they kept looking and looking, and they found more cases. And they published this paper in May of 2011 showing 83. It was something that Lou and I decided to pick up after the paper was published. And we were able to find an additional 26 cases of vaccine-induced autism that were compensated by this program. So if we can find 26, there's more out there. And the program's only the tip of the iceberg, because not everybody's going to be able to figure out that they got a vaccine-induced autism case and then spend the time to file a case. Okay. We're just the tip of the iceberg when you look at the cases inside the NVICP. There's thousands of cases out there. If we actually have the backbone and the honesty to look as a nation, look for them. So I had that case. In the second book, I also brought in the thing of the concept that this program is no longer for children. And I prove it by looking at the statistics of the program. Now, these decisions are public. The case decisions of every one of the that are filed in the as a petition in the NVICP, the final decisions are public. They're posted up on the government's court's website. And that's where I can go and harvest that decision. And I built my own database to start looking at it. And I got over about 17,000 cases in it. There's 27,000, approximately 27, 28,000 cases. There's a lot of cases that are not were not scanned in digitally and posted up on the court's website. Mainly the ones from the early and mid 1990s. But everything since about 1999 on is up on the court's website. And you'll find a few earlier ones. But I was able to put them together, and I can show that about 95, 96% of all compensated cases are for adults, and only 4 to 5% are for children. Yet this program is supposed to be for the childhood vaccine schedule, but it's almost all adults. And that's the policy of our federal government. And it doesn't matter whose administration it is. It's the policy of the federal government that children we shouldn't recognize childhood injury. We don't, as a country. It's that's a travesty. I mean, we always say, we're raising money for charities for the children. Yeah, but we don't really care at all for children when it comes to vaccine injury. We don't in this country, and it's a shame. So then I also then tie in, why did this happen? What was the shift? Well, influenza, the flu vaccine, which was first approved for the program back in 2004, 2005, became the dominant or prevalent injury, the vaccine for injury filings. And it's because of shoulder injury and what we call Guillain-Barré, which is basically your modern day polio, paralysis, usually of the lower limbs. That's what's causing. As a matter of fact, even today, it's about 85 to 88% of all injury claims right now filed are adult flu shots, injuries from shoulder injury and Guillain-Barré. So I kind of illustrate what's going on there, why that is, the shift there. We're no longer compensating for SIDS. That became about 15 years ago. A decision, I guess, was made
Let me
internally.
let me pause there, Wayne, because what you're saying is quite extraordinary. That it's the flu shot,
Right.
not the kind of the mainstream vaccines that are doing the most damage. How do you understand that? Do you kind of explain that?
Well, I think our nation we've known that the flu shot has always been a kind of a dangerous vaccine. You go back to DPT, which was taken off the market, was the worst one of them all. But the flu shot, you go back to, in my original book, I wrote a little bit about the swine flu fiasco of 1976. And one of the problems with any of the influenza vaccines back then and in today's market is Guillain-Barré, which is basically a paralysis of the lower limbs. It's always been an injury profile of those vaccines. In 1976, the product was rushed to market, and with the threat that we didn't want another Spanish flu issue in the United States. And then within 4 months, the vaccine in the program was halted because of too many injuries of Guillain-Barré and then also death. So that the flu shot we knew back then was always there. So fast forward to 2009, another swine flu threat appears on the horizon, and this is under President Obama. And we had a rush to
The
market of
throughput for both of them is Fauci.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's
And
multiple books written on Fauci on this issue.
yeah.
And I contributed to one of them by Bobby Kennedy. But 2009, we decided to H1N1 flu vaccine for the virus there was brought to the market really quick. Now, if anybody wanted to look at and run a parallel between the H1N1 development of the flu vaccine and the injury profile, and then look at how fast we brought the COVID vaccines to market, they're very similar. But no one talks about the flu vaccine of 2009, but it caused a tremendous number of injuries also. Most of them being Guillain-Barré. H1N1 was under emergency use authorization at the time, and then it was later approved for the regular schedule back in 2013, 2014, and it's part of one of the 4 strains of the today's quadrivalent flu vaccine. So, and it's still causing a lot of Guillain-Barré injuries. People, it's just like that. Hopefully, with today's modern medicine, the way we treatments are, a lot of people can recover if we get it to it quickly. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't. And it can lead to death, especially if the paralysis can't be halted and it moves up from the lower limbs into the core of the body and gets into the diaphragm and halts breathing. And that's a problem there. But the flu shot is one that we want to, and it's not, what I don't understand yet is that the effectiveness of the flu shot, anywhere from 20% to 40%, depending on the year, maybe variances of that. Why is it we keep promoting that when we know that it causes so many injuries?
And you can get your shot at any supermarket and pharmacy. It's when you walk
It's
in,
unbelievable.
hello, take
Yeah.
a flu shot.
But
Yeah, absolutely.
then I started digging into another one, and then in Vaccine Court 2.0, there was a new vaccine, created flu shot vaccine for seniors, the flu zone, and it was 4 times the titers of a normal flu shot. The thinking was that seniors don't have the immune system, so they're going to need a little bit of extra help. So if we give them a titers or a shot with 4 times the titers measurements than a regular flu shot, it would help them. What we're finding out in my initial digging into currently is that the Guillain-Barré cases are more severe to seniors. Seniors who are injured from the flu zone vaccine have more severe cases of Guillain-Barré leading to death than a senior with a regular flu shot, but yet it's on the market. Hopefully that'll change, but the FDA just rubber stamps these approval processes, and it's insane. But I've shown that in the court cases, decisions, how more severe it is by the medical testimony of medical experts, talking about how the Guillain-Barré is just so quickly comes on onset and so quickly severe. Now, that could still be, the individual person, but when you put them together, when you have thousands of cases or hundreds of death cases, something's there, but yet our health officials just ignore those connections.
Do you have any statistics, Wayne? Would be guesstimates, given the lack of official data, as to the percentages of people, both children and adults, who sustain some kind of injury due to the flu shots or the vaccine mandates? Do we have a rough idea?
We probably don't. For the main reason is that a lot of people don't make the connection,
Right.
and nor their doctors will introduce that topic. there's a lot of people who have been injured. I can tell that don't even think that oh, it's just something else, whatever. They just write it off. Now, the danger is that you try to blame everything on the vaccine, but also at the same time, a, a lot of people just are walking injury. They're just the walking injured, I should say, and they don't even realize it. But pharma or we have this turbo cancer discussion. Oh, but we're going to develop a vaccine to help prevent cancers, or we have other treatments. It goes back to the old adage that I think the Wrigley Gum Company out of Chicago, their desire was to have a packet of Wrigley gum in everybody's pocket back in the 40s, 50s. Then along comes Merck CEO back in, I think, 1953 or 54. He wanted to copy that. So you had a pharmaceutical company deciding we wanted to be in everybody's pocket. And basically what it is that we get them young as kids and getting them on a vaccine schedule. Now they're customers for life. And that's exactly where we are.
Exactly. Spawning all these chronic diseases that then they prescribe medications to not cure, but to just sustain.
That's correct. So, um,
Extraordinary.
it's so difficult to prove
Yeah.
things like this because the science doesn't study stuff. Once again, it's like Gardasil. When I was writing it, there's a lot of girls that are injured. And the shame is that we know that we can reasonably assume that it causes infertility, sterility. But the problem we can is, how do you prove that?
Right. Exactly.
Because you were giving that to the girls at the ages of 10, 11, 12, 13. At the same time, their menstrual cycles are very irregular. That's just normal. Then they decide they're going to have families a decade or a little bit longer, and they can't. That was the original cases of Gardasil in the vaccine court. Was the statute of limitations is only 3 years.
What was Gardasil prescribed for?
Uh, Human papillomavirus, basically, I guess, the sexual contact, preventing certain types of
Oh, the STD one, the one that's
yeah,
supposed to prevent for girls to get.
ovarian cancers and things like
Yeah.
this for girls.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Gotcha.
the thing that was though is that the original vaccine was never tested against a placebo, and so we really don't know. But a lot of these girls develop sterility, and which brings a point here is that when we're testing any type of vaccine, you generally have long-term clinical trials to tease out sterility and autoimmune disorders of any vaccine. But once again, the COVID vaccines, we never did do that at all. But when you bring a vaccine to market, you do want to make sure, 3, 5, 6, 7 year clinical trials, we don't introduce other autoimmune disorders or sterility. Well, Gardasil was fast tracked and brought into market.
And it's still being distributed.
You're still being produced.
Yeah.
And we didn't know, or our government, FDA, we believe didn't know that Merck hid. There's several risk group factors, such as certain girls taking antidepressants or certain girls taking acne medicines have a higher risk of certain reactions to the Gardasil. We don't know if that was actually submitted in the FDA applications, or it was not submitted and no one knew about it. So Merck's now under investigation through court cases, what they call a multi-district litigation, for fraud. So you have all these things here, but I did allude earlier, 2011, and I want to talk about that a little bit, and that's the Hannah Bruzewicz case. Hannah Bruzewicz is a U.S. Supreme Court case that basically altered our ability to sue manufacturers. And what happens is the normal process prior to Hannah Bruzewicz was you go into the program for 240 days or longer, and you can actually reject your decision or exit the program and take your chances. Bruzewicz basically in 2011 took that right away from us, U.S. Supreme Court. And I believe it was the U.S. Supreme Court's way of saying thank you to the pharmaceutical industry, because the pharmaceutical industry was used to pass the Obamacare legislation in 2009. Pharma was needed. They helped pass Obamacare in 2009. And this was a quid pro quo and saying, hey, thank you very much.
Got it.
And
Got it. Got it.
to basically, now we cannot sue the pharmaceutical industry at all for injury claims. We can still sue for fraud, but good luck there. So you have that. So it's just, it's mind-boggling is that our government is being used to continue to destroy us.
Yeah. Now, what do you think? I mean, you're encyclopedic in your knowledge, Wayne. I'm slightly overwhelmed at how much you know. Now, if you were advising President Trump or Robert Kennedy, who knows a lot, I've read his big book on the real Anthony Fauci and other articles and so forth. What would you say are his priorities? What do you think he needs to do in what order? Because he's still got big pharma arrayed against him. That hasn't gone away. Trump has managed to get, other individuals placed in CDC and NIH, et cetera. What do you think the priorities are? What can be done under current circumstances and constraints, in your view?
I've known Bobby for quite some time, and I've worked with him on many different occasions. And actually, it was one of the many contributors to the real Anthony Fauci book. So we all kind of worked together, doing some things. And we've bounced ideas off left and right on certain things over the last several years. I'll have to be careful what I speak about, because there's certain things that I believe Bobby is kind of handcuffed a little bit here, and it has to do with there's people still within the new administration that don't want certain reforms done.
I can imagine.
Yeah, and they're there to keep an eye on them, basically. Pharma is a monster. People need to understand that. I would like to see a couple things. One is that he's been told he's got a hands off on the childhood schedule, whatever, and like this. But I think if we return to real science, that's going to open the eyes of a lot of people. Right now, we've got a lot of pseudoscience out there showing things that, in the confirmation hearings, you say that, well, it's been proven that vaccines don't cause autism, and here's the three, studies that, Senator Sanders and Senator Cassidy and, everybody else is talking about, but they refuse to acknowledge all the other studies that show there is a potential causal link there. the PrEP Act is a big, ugly swamp creature out there too, which was formed, the legislation started in 2005. And I remember talking with one of the key people that was trying to lobby against the PrEP Act, and their conversation back then, it was Senator Ted Kennedy that said, "Do not pass this legislation. You're gonna rue the day." And he went to Senator Bill Frist, the Senate Majority Leader out of Tennessee, they passed the legislation, and apparently the story is that Kennedy put his finger very hard into Frist's chest and said, "Do not pass this legislation." But it did pass. And so we have it, and most people don't understand what it was until 2020 with the COVID pandemic outbreaks. But it really removes a lot of liberty, a lot of freedoms from the American people. That damn PrEP Act, after 30 days, the U.S. Supreme Court or Congress can't do a damn thing about it. We're shut out. Congress, nothing they can't do. Secretary of HHS has the power. Now, here's the issue. Can Bobby modify or declare the PrEP Act inactive for COVID? You got to remember there's PrEP Acts. There's one for the smallpox, monkeypox type issues, and Marburg disease that's still out there too. So PrEP Act is not just for COVID, but the COVID one is the one that affects everybody. And right before leaving office, this past administration extended the PrEP Act for another, 4.5, 5 years. Now, Bobby could do something about that. That's going to be very controversial. And I think he's going to have to play it smart. And I know he's going to be very smart about it and strategic. Um, and possibly.
About the whole issue of informed consent and doing away with the mandates. Because it seems to me if I had to pick one priority, it would be just do away with the mandates and let people make their own decision. Is that within the realm of possibility at all, or is that just?
But it's going to be it can happen. We got to be careful that Congress can come in and do some things. But informed consent is an interesting concept. And the thing is that the FDA has taken so many steps to basically remove a lot of the safety features of informed consent. And it was about a year ago that the FDA announced that if you're participating in a clinical trial of some sort, your doctor doesn't have to tell you certain features, why you're in that clinical trial, why he's changing the medicine. And my good friend, Dr. James Lyons Weiler, has written about this. He's talked about this. Matter of fact, he was on with Cheryl Atkinson just recently talking about informed consent has been a lot of the safety features have been removed out of. Some things like that can be restored. Now, we've got to get the right people into those positions. And once the FDA commissioner is put in place and the NIH director is put in place and the CDC director is put in place, I think you can see some things happening in informed consent. But you've got some people in there now that don't want the things to change. They love this. They love it right now. So yeah, you have to. Bobby just can't sit there with his magic marker and write on a piece of paper.
Yeah, this is all politics,
and make
boy.
changes.
Yeah.
You got to get Congress involved, but you're also going to have to get these federal agencies, which are their own little. Sometimes they act as their own little nations, their own, kingdoms. You got to get them to turn it around. So yes, it can happen. I think the PrEP Act needs to be addressed. I think that can happen, but I don't see it happening quickly. one message I'd give to everybody right now is have patience. A lot of people are thinking, oh, he's already in, now he can get things done. It takes a long time to drain and empty and get rid of these swamp creatures, if you will, that are in place.
Sure.
Um,
After decades of
after
institutional reinforcement
That's correct. That's correct. So
with Big Pharma, who has exerted virtual complete control over these agencies. So when you change the guy at the top, you're just changing the guy at the top.
right.
And so that's a good admonition. Now, what would you say, Wayne, for parents of kids who are confronted by the mandates and can't even get the religious exemption anymore? They know that things are starting to change. Um, One of the things I've said to my son and his wife, because we have a little grandson and they're wanting to, is just hold off, hold off, hold off as long as you possibly can until the politics get sorted out. Is that good advice? Am I saying the right things, or what
Well,
would you?
unfortunately, I think certain states are going to that love their hammer or their over the heads of these parents. It's going to take a lot longer. I still think, like New York and California and a few others, it's really difficult. And I know a lot of people have moved out of those states and moved to other states, um, so they can exercise their free right to decide for their own families. Unfortunately, there's some families that don't have the ability to do so. Um, that's a tough situation. Um, I
What
believe
states?
we
What
everybody should
states?
have the right to decide what's
Absolutely.
in the best interest for themselves and for their families. But unfortunately, we have some of these power thugs, whatever you want to call them, in certain states that decide that we know what's best. And once and also the science is going to prove out in the long run that vaccinating everybody is going to be very dangerous. We know the problems with measles and we know the problems with mumps with vaccination
Mhm.
programs, what that's caused, and why we have mumps outbreaks all the time, and why we have a cyclical measles outbreak every approximately 4 to 5 years, while we're seeing it now. Um, I guess the public officials just don't want to acknowledge,
Exactly.
the failures
Exactly.
of over vaccinating. I had the great pleasure of interviewing Gert van der Bosch, um, who's good friends with your Matthias Desmond.
Mhm.
Oh, by the way, I don't know if I got Matthias's book.
Yeah,
Um,
that's an
that was
essential
a,
read.
oh yes, it is. And but I talked to Gert. He was talking about his theory at the time. He hypothesized that those who were vaccinated and were boosted, and this is March of 2022, um, are going to become magnets for future variants of the COVID vaccine. And sure enough,
Sure
there's
enough.
a paper that was released last month by Dr. Jessica Rose. Maybe she mentioned it to you on her interview, and shown that those who have been vaccinated and boosted are chronically ill with the COVID all the time.
Yeah.
Um, and this is what happens when you vaccinate during an outbreak. Virologists will tell you never vaccinate during an outbreak, especially any type of virus that can shed. Either vaccinate prior or after, but never during an outbreak.
Right.
And going back to this measles issue, I believe down in Texas, this child that did die was suffering already.
Exactly.
And did they vaccinate him when he already had the measles, which is dangerous, or vaccinate when he was chronically ill already or
Yeah.
acutely ill with pneumonia and RSV. Um, so I think that's more of a fear mongering. We don't know the particulars yet, but we will soon. Um, but these vaccines, they're not perfect, and they have a injury profile, and they do wane over time. So um, I think parents should decide what's best for them. I'm not going to give any advice and say don't get this or don't get that.
No, no, no. But
Um, um, my suggestion is that you decide what's best for your family and move on. Unfortunately, some families can't do that because of where they're living and their job
now,
requirements.
now, how are your boys doing?
They're fine. Well, Nicholas, I say he's fine because he's 27. He's upstairs. He's nonverbal still,
Oh.
living in pull-ups. He requires constant care, but he's up there watching his movies on his tablet, um, Barney movies, or listening to music videos. He loves listening to music videos. But you know, he's a happy boy, and we continue to keep him that way. We know we're going to have to take care of him for the rest of his life. My son Austin is his legal guardian, and he takes care of his brother when he can in the evenings or whatever. My wife and I are also legal guardians, and so we take care of him. We have employ um, a person that takes care of Nick during the day, 40 hours a week, 45 hours a week. And then we take care of him in the evenings. Now, one of the jobs that I do as Nick's father every evening is we get in, and Nick loves this, is we get in and go driving around in the neighborhoods. We pick
Mm.
up a couple orders of French fries for him. And on his tablet, he'll be listening to probably Christmas music or Bible songs or whatever, just music. He loves music. And we'll be driving around for an hour, hour and a half. That it's a ritual that we both do every day that I'm home,
Fantastic.
and he just enjoys it. He knows when it's time to do it because he'll come and grab me and kind of go to the back door to the garage and sit down. Then it's the signal I know that we're going out for a ride.
Fantastic. Do
But
you know
that's
about
it. I mean,
yeah. Do you know about the telepathy tapes?
no, I do not.
I'll send you a link.
Okay.
But it's an extraordinary revelation that's coming into the public domain, Wayne, about the extraordinary clairvoyance that many autistic young people have, that's been largely unnoticed, but is being researched by people like Diane Hennessy Powell, a neuro scientist, and Key Dickens. I'll send it to you. I'll send you the link. But it might be worth you and your wife listening to that.
That'll be
Uh,
good. Great. Yeah, we kind of know his mannerisms and what
uh-huh.
something's bothering him. We know that, and but our family is dictated on what we call Nick's time. You
Mm,
know,
mm.
he kind of knows when his bedtime is, and he generally heads up to bed, and he's a good sleeper. Um, but once again, he's not potty trained still, but we deal with that. Um, we've
Wow.
tried. There's attempts like that, and we constantly work with him. But he's to where the point where he's satisfied with what he's doing. I wish I knew everything that he was thinking about. I think my greatest wish would be someday for us to sit on a park bench and he talk to me. He can talk to me. That's what I want. Just to
Mm.
say hello.
Just to say hello.
But right now we will sit on a bench. We'll go for a walk at the parks here, and we'll sit there, and he just looks around, very observant, and enjoys it. Then during the summer, he's out in his backyard. He's got his huge trampoline. He just out there playing all the time.
Fantastic.
So that's it.
Well, Wayne, I salute you, brother, and your wife, and your other son, Austin.
Mhm.
Um, it's such it's a challenge raising kind of normal kids in this day and age, and for you to take on that extra burden that you know was induced by a vaccine that you did willingly and unknowingly. That's big. That's strong. That's strong.
People call us anti-vaxxers. We're not anti-vaxxers.
Exactly.
We were for vaccination until the injury. Now we're very risk aware,
Sure. Of course.
and we know and then through the course of our work and my research, I've been able to understand the clinical trial process and the fallacy of how safe that is. It's actually not. The marketing slogans of safe and effective is just it's garbage. But
Yeah,
it's not just vaccines; it's medicines too.
exactly. Exactly.
People don't understand that, especially these antidepressants. Holy cow!
Oh,
And I've become good friends with a few leading advocates there, understanding Dr. David Healy and Kim Witzak, talking about how our government is pushing, and American Academy of Pediatricians are pushing antidepressants on women, especially pregnant women, which is extremely dangerous. But you know,
unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Well, all strength to you, brother. All
thank you.
strength. And thank you for everything you did to help build this program this week. This has been one of our most important programs since we started.
Let me know. I run across so many people, and I talk to so many different people, different areas, and it's want to share with others. That's what, you know, I don't have a master's degree in health or anything like this. My degree was basically Budweiser and playing golf, but actually it was economics. But
You have
but
a PhD in life, man.
you learn, but at the same time, it's just we're all I figured out a long time ago, we're all walking in similar direction, just
Yeah,
different paths. We need to stop, take a breath, look to our left, look to our right, and greet the people that are walking with us.
exactly.
Um, there's so many of us.
Thank you, Wayne. Wayne Rohde, everyone. This will conclude our program for today. Wayne will join the after chat for a bit. And then tomorrow we'll visit with John Clark, an attorney, to wrap up our 5-day program. We
It's going to be a
salute you,
good
Wayne.
interview. That's going to be a
Yeah,
good interview.
looking forward to it. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.